You begin with the image of a young boy in Grays, Essex, born in 1975, growing up in a small town that couldn't contain the energy he carried inside. Russell Brand's early years are marked by upheaval. His parents divorced when he was still a child, and his relationship with both was patchy at best. You picture him as restless, skipping across the edges of ordinary school life, already yearning for something bigger, shinier, more theatrical. That yearning would later become the charisma that drew millions, but it also lit the fuse for the controversies that followed. And tonight, as you lean into the story of Russell Brand, charisma and controversy, you begin where it all started, with a boy trying to outgrow the walls around him. This is 102 Hours, the channel where you and I wandered together through true crime, scandals, and mysteries that stretch beyond headlines into the quiet spaces of human frailty. I'm glad you're here, listening in the soft dark. If you enjoy these whispered journeys, you know what to do. Tap like, subscribe, and let the bell keep you company. And before we dive deeper, drop your location and your local time in the comments below. I love seeing the map of glowing dots, a constellation of night owls, early risers, and insomniacs all listening together. For now, stay close, because Russell Brand's story begins in shadows and small-town streets, where fame seemed a distant flicker. From childhood, Brand leaned toward performance. He attended the Italia Conti Academy of Theatre Arts in London, a place known for producing actors and entertainers. But his time there ended abruptly when his erratic behavior and struggles with substance use clashed with formal training. That pattern, intense talent colliding with destructive impulses, would become a theme running through Russell Brand: charisma and controversy. In the late 1990s, while many of his peers were steadily pursuing careers, he was already known for chaotic energy, often described as magnetic and volatile in equal measure. One mainstream historical fact that gives context. In the mid-1990s, the UK's stand-up comedy scene was undergoing a renaissance, moving from smoky clubs into mainstream television and radio. This wider cultural shift created space for voices like Brand's, raw, fast-talking, boundary-pushing performers who could leap from comedy venues to national platforms. His timing was impeccable, even if his personal habits sometimes burned bridges before they were fully built. A quirky, fringe tidbit. In those early days, Brand reportedly auditioned for small TV roles wearing makeup and flamboyant outfits long before such styles became part of his public identity. Some colleagues joked that he arrived at auditions already performing as Russell Brand, as though he had invented himself wholesale before anyone knew his name. That sense of self-mythology, the creation of a character larger than life, was already present, a preview of the charisma side of Russell Brand, charisma and controversy. Yet investigators still question whether the seeds of later controversies were already there in his early behaviors: the volatile temper, the erratic relationships with authority, and the compulsive search for attention. Was the young man simply destined to burn brightly and crash? Or were these warning signs missed because people were too charmed by his wit? It is a question with no clear answer, though one that haunts the story. As you follow him through those first steps, leaving Essex, stumbling through acting school, clawing his way onto tiny comedy stages, you see the shape of a narrative forming. He wasn't simply a boy from Grays anymore. He was a persona in the making. Every stumble added to the mythology. Every chaotic night out became part of the performance. He was both the hero of his own story and its biggest liability. This is how Russell Brand, charisma and controversy begins, with a restless child who became a restless man, whose undeniable magnetism masked deeper turbulence. The stage was being set, the character was crystallizing, and the world was just about to notice. You picture the lights dimming in a cramped comedy club, the faint smell of beer and cigarettes in the air, and there he is, Russell Brand, tall, wiry, hair already resembling a wild mane, stepping onto the stage. His voice is quick, tumbling over itself, his mannerisms larger than life. This is the beginning of his stand-up persona, a mix of biting wit, cheeky rebellion, and theatrical self-destruction. He isn't just telling jokes, he's performing himself, creating a whirlwind character who draws you in, even as you sense the chaos beneath. And as you listen, you realize that Russell Brand, charisma and controversy is inseparable from this stage act. It was his entry ticket to the worlds of radio and television, but it also carried seeds of what would later unravel. At the turn of the millennium, stand-up in the UK wasn't just about clubs anymore. Comedians were being pulled into panel shows, late-night programs, and radio slots. Brand rode that wave. His radio work, particularly on BBC Radio 2, showcased his rapid-fire delivery, his irreverence, and his willingness to provoke. The infamous Saxgate incident in 2008, when he and Jonathan Ross left inappropriate voicemail messages during a live broadcast, sparked public outrage, parliamentary debates, and a wave of complaints that forced his resignation. It was an early demonstration of how Brand's style, once celebrated for being daring, could cross into territory that cost him dearly. One mainstream historical fact: British broadcasting had already been reshaped by earlier controversies. Think of the 1990s shock jock era in the United States or the debates around free speech on air. The UK regulator Ofcom was increasingly vigilant, and Brand's antics collided with a broader conversation about what public broadcasters should allow. This wasn't just about one radio show. It was part of a cultural shift around media responsibility, a quirky tidbit. During his peak radio days, Brand reportedly kept a full-size portrait of himself in his studio, gazing down as he spoke to listeners. Friends and co-hosts joked that he wasn't just performing for the audience, but also for his own reflection. It fits perfectly with the theatrical narcissism he cultivated, a man who treated everyday banter as though it were Shakespearean drama. And yet, investigators still question whether the boundaries blurred too much. Was the on-air Russell simply a character who ran away from him? Or was the performance an extension of impulses he couldn't restrain? That question lingers like feedback on a live mic, unresolved and unsettling. Television, too, opened its doors. He hosted Big Brother's Big Mouth, a late-night spin-off where his flamboyant style stood out. Audiences either adored or despised him, but either way, they noticed him. Fame grew quickly, his image splashed across tabloids, celebrated for being different in a media landscape that often preferred polished presenters. And you, sitting in the quiet now, can feel the pull of that magnetism. The risk, the spectacle, the laughter mixed with discomfort. What makes this part of Russell Brand? Charisma and controversy so telling is how it highlights the contradictions. He was the comedian who poked at authority but also needed the approval of institutions like the BBC. He was the radio host who thrived on attention, but fell hardest when that attention turned to criticism. It is a duality that defines him: charisma opening doors, controversy slamming them shut. The leap from comedy clubs and late-night radio to the big screen came swiftly, and you can almost picture the poster displays in cinema foyers, Russell Brand's name, alongside Hollywood stars, suddenly front and center. For a man who once hustled on small London stages, the move to film looked like vindication. Russell Brand. Charisma and controversy now enters its Hollywood chapter, where charm opened doors to global fame, but the shadows trailed close behind. His breakout moment arrived with Forgetting Sarah Marshall in 2008. Playing Aldous Snow, the decadent, over-the-top rock star, Brand was both parody and embodiment of the excess he lived off stage. Audiences laughed, critics praised, and Hollywood took notice. That role spun off into Get Him to the Greek, 2010, where he reprised Snow with even greater flamboyance. The irony was striking. Russell Brand, known for his struggles with addiction and self-destructive behavior, was now celebrated for playing a character who thrived on chaos. You're left to wonder if he was acting at all. Mainstream historical fact: the late 2000s marked a surge of British comedians breaking into Hollywood. Think Ricky Gervais, Simon Pegg, and Sacha Baron Cohen. Brand's entry into that lineage made sense culturally, as American studios courted edgy UK talent to freshen comedy. But unlike others, his comedic style carried sharper controversy, more unpredictability. Hollywood gambled on that rawness, hoping charisma would outweigh risk. A quirky tidbit: during the filming of Get Him to the Greek, Brand reportedly improvised so wildly that co-stars sometimes struggled to keep straight faces. On one occasion, he ad-libbed entire monologues about spirituality and fame that had nothing to do with the script. Producers kept rolling, partly exasperated, partly mesmerized. It was Brand unfiltered, simultaneously brilliant and exhausting. As his star rose, he lent his voice to animated films, fronted award shows, and became a staple on red carpets. But with greater visibility came greater scrutiny. His whirlwind marriage to pop star Katy Perry in 2010, lavishly covered by the press, burned brightly and collapsed quickly. The divorce in 2012 fed tabloids hungry for every messy detail, and it painted Brand not only as a comic talent, but also as a man whose personal life was public property. Investigators still question whether the Hollywood years amplified traits that had always been there: the hunger for attention, the embrace of chaos, and the disregard for boundaries. Was his on-screen persona feeding his off-screen behavior, or was it the other way around? That blurred line became harder to separate with each premiere, each scandal, each breathless profile in glossy magazines. By the mid-2010s, Brand was both a fixture and an outlier. Hollywood wanted his energy but feared his unpredictability. He was cast as both comic relief and cultural commentator, sometimes celebrated, sometimes scorned. And through it all, Russell Brand. Charisma and controversy deepened. Fame magnified charisma, but also magnified the consequences. You settle back into the softer glow of memory, watching Russell Brand's career before 2023 as a pattern of dazzling triumphs followed by equally dramatic collapses. This isn't yet the legal saga, those charges come later, but already Russell Brand, charisma and controversy was being written in bold strokes. The earlier scandals, the public apologies, and the way he walked the tightrope between acceptance and exile all pointed to what was coming. One headline moment was 2008's Saxgate, when Brand and fellow presenter Jonathan Ross left a series of inappropriate voicemails during a BBC Radio 2 broadcast. The incident drew tens of thousands of complaints, forced apologies, and ultimately cost both men their shows. It wasn't just a prank gone wrong, it became a debate in Parliament, an example of how celebrity could warp boundaries. The BBC, a public institution held to high standards, was compelled to reckon with what it meant to give controversial figures a microphone. Mainstream historical fact. The late 2000s saw a wave of public accountability moments for broadcasters. UK tabloids were exposing phone hacking scandals, regulators were tightening oversight, and the public mood leaned toward demanding accountability. Brand's downfall at the BBC fitted into that bigger cultural reckoning, even if his defenders argued it was blown out of proportion. A quirky tidbit. During his post-Saxgate exile, Brand briefly reinvented himself as a columnist, penning pieces that veered between sharp social commentary and eccentric musings about philosophy. Readers joked that opening his columns felt like being cornered at a party by a man who wanted to debate metaphysics while everyone else reached for canapes. It was both odd and oddly compelling, but the controversies kept circling. There were tabloid stories of wild nights out, struggles with addiction, and a revolving door of high-profile relationships. By 2013, Brand shifted into political commentary, publishing Revolution, a book calling for sweeping social change. Critics dismissed it as incoherent. Fans hailed it as visionary. Either way, it was another example of his ability to command attention, to turn personal reinvention into spectacle. Investigators still question whether this cycle of scandal and redemption, outrage, apology, reinvention, prepared the public to dismiss or excuse too much. Was society complicit in letting charisma overshadow accountability? Or was it simply the way media works, forever hungry for spectacle and scandal alike? Those questions echo as you look back on the pre-2023 years. By the time he reinvented himself as a YouTube commentator in the late 2010s, discussing everything from spirituality to conspiracies, Brand had already lived several public lives. Each phase ended with controversy. Each new act promised reinvention. Russell Brand. Charisma and controversy was no longer a side note. It had become his brand. You feel the shift in the air as the story crosses into September 2023, when investigative journalists from major British outlets, The Sunday Times, The Times, and Channel 4's Dispatches, released a joint report that changed everything. Russell Brand. Charisma and controversy was no longer just a tale of public antics or media scandals. It became the focus of serious allegations, collected over years, presented with careful corroboration. In that moment, the mood shifted from cheeky tabloid fodder to questions of accountability and justice. The investigation detailed accounts from multiple women alleging sexual assault, controlling behavior, and emotional manipulation. Some allegations dated back to the early 2000s, overlapping with Brand's period of rising fame in comedy and film. Others described incidents from later years. Each account, presented with sensitivity and evidence, painted a disturbing picture that clashed with the comedian's public persona of charming eccentricity and supposed spiritual awakening. One mainstream historical fact that grounds this moment, 2023, was still within the ripple effects of the Churchill Me Too movement, which had already reshaped industries across the globe. From Hollywood to Westminster, allegations against powerful men were no longer dismissed as gossip. They were being documented, investigated, and, in some cases, prosecuted. Brand's case slotted into this wider cultural reckoning, a British chapter in an ongoing global story. A quirky tidbit. The Channel 4 Dispatches episode aired under heavy secrecy, with even staff in the network reportedly not given details until the last minute. Viewers tuned in with little more than a cryptic program title and speculation swirling online. The broadcast became an event in itself, part investigation, part cultural flashpoint, drawing millions who felt like they were watching a public unmasking. Investigators still question whether the allegations would have surfaced without that coordinated effort by multiple outlets. For years, rumors circulated, yet they remained whispers in green rooms and online forums. Was it institutional reluctance, fear of libel laws, or the sheer magnetism of Brand's persona that kept stories from surfacing sooner? The answer is complex and perhaps unknowable, but it lingers as an uncomfortable shadow. The reporting triggered swift responses. The BBC, Channel 4, and other employers announced reviews of past work with Brand. His live shows were postponed. YouTube demonetized his channel. Sponsors pulled out. The allegations, still untested in court, nonetheless had immediate professional consequences. And, for the first time, the conversation around Russell Brand, charisma, and controversy wasn't driven by his charisma at all. It was driven by the voices of those who came forward. The story moves from media revelations into the realm of formal investigation, where headlines give way to police statements and courtroom calendars. In the wake of the 2023 exposés, the Metropolitan Police confirmed that several reports had been filed. Detectives began sifting through years of allegations, interviewing complainants, and tracing possible evidence from events that were, in some cases, more than a decade old. Russell Brand. Charisma and controversy was no longer a cultural debate. It had become a legal matter. By late 2024, Scotland Yard announced that files had been submitted to the Crown Prosecution Service, CPS, the body responsible for assessing whether charges should be brought. Then came the turning point. In April 2025, the CPS authorized 5 criminal charges against Russell Brand, including 1 count of rape, 1 count of oral rape, one of indecent assault, and 2 counts of sexual assault. Each charge related to alleged incidents between 1999 and 2005, involving 4 separate complainants. It was a strikingly serious escalation, shifting the conversation from allegation to accusation in a court of law. A mainstream historical fact underscores this moment. The UK's Sexual Offences Act 2003 had redefined and broadened legal definitions of consent and assault, making it easier for cases involving non-recent allegations to move forward. The timing of Brand's charges reflected not just the allegations themselves, but also the legal landscape shaped by this early 2000s reform. A quirky tidbit: when news of the charges broke, observers noted that Brand's own YouTube channel, which had pivoted into wellness, spirituality, and anti-establishment commentary, suddenly became a focal point of speculation. Viewers pored over old videos, some claiming that cryptic references or monologues hinted at his awareness of the coming storm. It became an internet pastime, part conspiracy, part theater, reflecting how his charisma still colored even the public's reception of serious news. Investigators still question whether the CPS's decision to move forward was influenced by the sheer volume of public attention the case had attracted. Would the same allegations, absent the media glare, have reached the same legal outcome? Officially, the CPS insists its decisions rest only on evidence and legal tests. Yet the question lingers, illustrating how Russell Brand, charisma and controversy exists at the crossroads of law, media, and culture. From a performance stage to a police station, the shift is stark. The man, once known for quick wit and flamboyant excess, is now defined by case files, witness statements, and the sterile formality of court proceedings. The charisma that opened doors cannot shield him here. The controversy has hardened into charges, and the story edges toward a trial that will test both the allegations and the public's relationship with the persona they once celebrated. You now find yourself in the courtroom, a place where charisma is stripped away and procedure rules the stage. Russell Brand. Charisma and controversy has reached its most serious act, the point where charges are read, pleas are entered, and trial dates are etched into the calendar. For a man who built his career on controlling the narrative, here the story belongs to the judge, the jury, and the law. In May 2025, Brand stood at Westminster Magistrates Court for his first appearance, charged with 5 offenses: 1 count of rape, 1 count of oral rape, 1 of indecent assault, and 2 counts of sexual assault. The allegations dated between 1999 and 2005, and 4 complainants were named in the indictment. He was granted conditional bail, a procedural step that allowed him to remain free but under restrictions while awaiting trial. The case was quickly escalated to Southwark Crown Court, the venue for more serious criminal matters. At that Crown Court hearing later in May, Brand entered pleas of not guilty to all charges. His defense team signaled their intention to contest the credibility of evidence and highlighted the challenges of prosecuting allegations so many years after the alleged events. The court set a trial date for June 3, 2026, with an estimated length of several weeks, acknowledging the complexity of handling multiple complainants and historic allegations. Mainstream historical fact: Southwark Crown Court has hosted many high-profile trials, from political corruption to celebrity cases. Its reputation as a stage for Britain's biggest scandals adds weight to proceedings. For Brand, it means that the trial will unfold under both legal scrutiny and public spotlight. A quirky tidbit. Outside the courthouse, media reported that some of Brand's supporters gathered holding placards referencing his YouTube channel themes: freedom of speech, anti-establishment slogans, even mystical symbols. It was a surreal contrast. Inside, the clinical language of charges and pleas. Outside, a theater of fandom and protest blending spirituality with celebrity politics. Investigators still question whether the sheer visibility of the case will influence jurors, despite the strict instructions courts give. Can anyone truly sit in judgment without the noise of headlines, social media debates, and brands' own counter-narratives echoing in their minds? It's a question that reflects how the trial is not only about evidence, but also about the collision between fame and justice. For now, the story stands paused on the edge of resolution. The charges are clear, the pleas are entered, the trial date is fixed. The courtroom doors will open in 2026, and what began as whispers in tabloids has hardened into a formal test of law. In Russell Brand, Charisma and Controversy. This is the moment where anticipation and uncertainty intertwine, and the world waits to see whether the narrative of charisma can withstand the cold reality of cross-examination. You imagine the weight of voices breaking silence, the kind of testimony that carries both pain and power. In Russell Brand, Charisma and Controversy, the accounts of accusers are central, yet they are also delicate, requiring dignity and restraint in how they are told. When women stepped forward in 2023 to speak to The Times, The Sunday Times, and Channel 4, they described alleged incidents that shook the public perception of Brand. Some spoke of being young and vulnerable, others of being manipulated or controlled, and still others of experiences they say left scars long after. Their accounts were not told in sensational tones, but in careful, deliberate words, often after years of silence. What made these testimonies resonate wasn't just their detail, but the patterns they suggested. Several described Brand as using his fame and charm to lower defenses, then allegedly crossing lines that could not be uncrossed. For listeners and readers, it was jarring. The same man who preached about love and spirituality on YouTube was now accused of exploitation in private. It created a dissonance that drew empathy for the accusers and questions about how such stories could have gone unheard for so long. One mainstream historical fact: the UK has witnessed similar waves of survivors, voices reshaping narratives before. Consider the Jimmy Savile scandal, which erupted posthumously but revealed decades of ignored allegations. That case influenced the urgency and seriousness with which later reports, like those involving Brand, were investigated. The echo of Savile's legacy hung in the background, a reminder of why survivor voices could no longer be brushed aside. A quirky tidbit: one accuser reportedly kept a diary at the time of her alleged encounter with Brand, filled with handwritten entries that later became part of corroborating evidence. It wasn't meant for a courtroom or newspaper, just a teenager's private record. Yet years later, it became a poignant detail, a reminder that the voices now speaking publicly had always been there, even if unread. Investigators still question whether the climate of 2023 finally gave these women the courage to speak, or whether the collaborative nature of the investigation gave them strength in numbers. Would the same voices have been heard if only one person had come forward? It's an unsettling question, one that highlights how collective testimony can shift what once seemed immovable. The voices of the accusers, fragile and strong at once, reshaped Russell Brand, Charisma and Controversy into something larger than an entertainer's downfall. They turned it into a story about belief, power, and the human cost of silence. Whether in courts of law or courts of public opinion, their words ensure that this chapter cannot be reduced to gossip or spectacle. It demands to be heard in full. You lean into Brand's own words, the responses that punctuate Russell Brand, Charisma and Controversy. From the moment allegations surfaced in 2023, he maintained a public stance of denial. Press statements, interviews, and social media posts emphasize that he vehemently denies any wrongdoing, framing himself as a man caught in a storm of misrepresentation and media frenzy. This is a familiar narrative in celebrity cases: charm and rhetoric used to influence perception, even as legal processes unfold. Mainstream historical fact: legal protocol in the UK ensures that anyone charged is presumed innocent until proven guilty. Brand's not guilty plea in May 2025 followed this principle. It also shaped how journalists had to report the story, carefully distinguishing between allegations, charges, and convictions. No matter how sensational the headlines, the legal reality remained. The court had yet to decide. A quirky tidbit. Brand's defense team reportedly encouraged him to continue creating content online during pre-trial proceedings, though under advisement not to discuss specifics. Observers found it ironic that the man under serious criminal investigation could maintain a channel dedicated to mindfulness, spirituality, and social critique, yet it reflected his comfort with narrative control, a skill honed over decades. Investigators still question whether his public persona, the irreverent, charming philosophical figure, affects how allegations are received. Does fame obscure the gravity of claims? Do audiences discount testimonies because they are filtered through the lens of celebrity? These are uncomfortable but real concerns, illustrating the tension between public image and legal scrutiny. In his public statements, Brand often blended humor, philosophy, and social commentary, attempting to redirect attention from legal scrutiny to cultural discourse. Interviews highlighted topics like addiction recovery, spiritual growth, and societal change. Some saw this as an attempt to humanize himself, others interpreted it as deflection. Either way, it was part of the continuing story of Russell Brand, charisma and controversy. A man whose persona is inseparable from the narrative itself. As you follow his legal defense strategy, you notice a pattern: denial, coupled with attempts to shape perception. The courtroom stage will strip that away eventually, but until then, the interplay between charisma, narrative, and accountability remains central. Brand's response is not merely legal, it is performative, reflective of a lifetime spent managing the public gaze, even as allegations threaten to rewrite the story entirely. You step back to see the wider cultural lens framing Russell Brand, charisma, and controversy. Beyond courtrooms and allegations, the case has sparked a conversation about celebrity, media, and the limits of public fascination. Fans and detractors alike weigh in online, some defending Brand as a misunderstood genius, others condemning him as a cautionary tale of unchecked fame. Social media threads swell with arguments over accountability, redemption, and the power dynamics between celebrities and ordinary people. It's a storm where charisma meets consequence. Mainstream historical fact. The UK has a long history of celebrity scandals influencing public debate. From press barons in the early 20th century to the rise of tabloid culture in the 1990s. Brand's case is another example of how fame amplifies both voice and scrutiny. Unlike previous eras, however, the immediacy of social media accelerates public judgment, often before legal processes conclude. A quirky tidbit. Fan forums debated whether Brand's spiritual YouTube videos, some discussing personal growth and emotional intelligence, could coexist with the allegations. Some fans claimed he was a misunderstood guru, while others insisted the content was performative, a veneer for darker patterns. This strange duality, philosophy and scandal, illustrates how his persona complicates public perception. Investigators still question whether cultural fascination with celebrity can unintentionally shield misconduct. When an audience is captivated by charisma, do they overlook warning signs, rationalize behavior, or become complicit in silencing complaints? The intersection of fame, media, and justice is fraught, and Brand's story demonstrates that charisma alone cannot guarantee accountability. Media coverage has evolved, too. Where once tabloid sensationalism dominated, now long-form journalism, investigative podcasts, and documentary reporting dissect patterns of behavior, timing, and public influence. This adds layers to Russell Brand, charisma, and controversy. It is not just about a man or his fame, but about how society negotiates admiration, accountability, and belief in a world dominated by spectacle. You notice that fandom, outrage, and curiosity feed each other in endless loops. The court trial will unfold in months, but the cultural conversation is ongoing. It is a reminder that charisma can create influence that lasts far beyond stage lights or cinema screens. but it cannot override the consequences of alleged actions. In this tangled web, Brand S' story exists as both performance and warning, a reflection of a society that elevates spectacle while struggling to weigh responsibility. You sense the unresolved tension that defines Russell Brand: charisma and controversy. Even with charges authorized and trial dates set, there remain gaps, questions investigators and journalists still question whether the full truth will ever emerge. Evidence from decades ago is inevitably incomplete. Memories fade, records are partial, and witnesses may be reluctant. This uncertainty forms a shadow that hangs over the narrative, a reminder that even in the age of media scrutiny, some aspects of the past resist clarity. Mainstream historical fact: legal systems around the world frequently encounter challenges with non-recent allegations, balancing the rights of the accused with the need to hear and protect complainants. British law specifically allows historic cases to be prosecuted, but procedural and evidentiary challenges often complicate outcomes. Brand A.'s case is emblematic of this tension. Historic allegations combined with a high-profile defendant create both procedural and public challenges. A quirky tidbit: amateur online sleuths and fans have scoured interviews, public appearances, and even old comedy routines for hints or patterns, attempting to reconstruct timelines or behavioral cues. While mostly speculative, it underscores the modern appetite for piecing together public and private personas in real time. The fascination is partly forensic, partly performative, a reflection of how Brand's charisma and public visibility shape collective perception. Investigators still question whether fame itself interferes with justice. Could the shadow of celebrity intimidate witnesses, distort recollections, or bias juries? Does charisma complicate the pursuit of clarity? These questions are not rhetorical. They are active concerns that courts, police, and prosecutors must consider throughout the trial. The unanswered questions extend beyond legalities. Culturally, they probe how society reconciles admiration with accountability. Brand's case forces a reflection. Can someone be talented, entertaining, or transformative and still be held responsible for alleged transgressions? Or does fame create a protective aura, however fragile, that delays justice? In this way, Russell Brand: charisma and controversy becomes not just the story of one man, but a lens into broader societal struggles over power, personality, and perception. As you sit quietly, listening to these echoes, it becomes clear that this chapter of the narrative is both open-ended and instructive. Unresolved questions do not signify weakness in the investigation. They illustrate the complexity of truth, particularly when it intersects with fame, charisma, and controversy. You arrive at the point where speculation meets consequence, the potential outcomes of Russell Brand, charisma, and controversy. With trial set for June 3, 2026, all eyes, legal, cultural, and public, will turn toward Southwark Crown Court. The verdict, whether conviction, acquittal, or some negotiated resolution, will define not just Brand's legal fate, but also the enduring narrative of his life, career, and public persona. Until that moment arrives, the story hangs in suspense, a tense blend of charisma, controversy, and unresolved human complexity. Mainstream historical fact: high-profile trials often influence public opinion even before juries deliberate. Cases like Rolf Harris, Harvey Weinstein, and Jimmy Savile illustrate that public narrative and media framing can shift perception, sometimes dramatically, even in advance of formal judgment. Brand's case will inevitably be filtered through similar lenses, complicated by his long-standing celebrity and polarizing fan base. A quirky tidbit: commentators have noted that even potential outcomes have inspired metaphors in online discussions. Some fans liken Brand's trial to a theater performance, he on stage, the law as audience and judge, and the world collectively holding its breath. This whimsical framing contrasts with the sobering reality of legal consequence. highlighting the odd interplay between spectacle and accountability that has always been part of Brand's story. Investigators still question whether the public and jurors will separate the man from the myth. Will charisma cloud judgment? Can cultural fascination with fame obscure evidence? These uncertainties underscore the difficulty of reconciling personal talent with alleged misconduct. In Brand's case, the questions are as much about society as the individual: how we process charm, how we weigh accusations, and how we confront uncomfortable truths. Looking ahead, possible outcomes range from conviction, with the accompanying social and professional consequences, to acquittal, which may prompt debates about legal thresholds, public perception, and survivor voices. Either result will reverberate through British media, culture, and Brand's own career, shaping both his legacy and public discourse. In contemplating these scenarios, you begin to see that Russell Brand, charisma, and controversy is more than a biography or scandal chronicle. It is a prism through which fame, accountability, and human complexity are refracted. The legacy question is unavoidable. How will history remember him? Will he be defined by talent and laughter, or by allegations and legal scrutiny? Perhaps both, intertwined inseparably, reflecting the duality that has long characterized his public life. As the trial date approaches, the world waits to see which narrative will dominate, though the story's echoes, charisma, and controversy are unlikely to vanish. As the chapters of Russell Brand, charisma, and controversy settle into memory, you lean back and let the details wash over you like the slow tide against a quiet shore. The story you've followed is a complex mosaic: a boy from Essex, a magnetic performer, a controversial celebrity, a man facing serious allegations. Each piece reflects facets of charisma and public intrigue, intertwined with the sobering reality of accountability. You've walked through the stages of his life: the early turbulence, the radio and comedy fame, Hollywood visibility, public controversies, the surfacing of allegations, police investigations, and the looming trial, always mindful of the voices of accusers and the principle of presumed innocence. In this quieter space, the story takes on a reflective tone. You notice how the cycle of fame and scandal, of admiration and critique, has repeated across decades. How charisma can captivate yet complicate. How the public eye can be both protective and unforgiving. You recognize that, regardless of outcome, the story has already influenced broader conversations about celebrity, power, and the responsibility we owe to one another. Take a moment to breathe, gentle and slow, and consider how narratives like this shape understanding. There is fascination, yes, but also lessons in perception, empathy, and vigilance. As the world waits for formal resolution, you hold both curiosity and caution. You sit in the quiet awareness that not all questions have answers yet, that the story continues to unfold, and that every person in this tale, famous or otherwise, carries complexity that can rarely be distilled to headlines alone. And now, as you drift from the intensity of the narrative into your own space, let the echoes fade softly, letting the calm return. The story has been explored with care, respect, and attention, and you can rest, holding in mind the balance of human brilliance and fallibility.